Imagine, if you will, a professional wrestling company featuring some of the worst professional wrestling you've ever seen, paired up with even worse backstage promos and commentary that at times aged like complete and total milk. It sounds like a nightmare to some, an insult to the industry for others, but to me, well, at least it was only $5. So, last week's video about Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn's ascent to the top of the WWE got me all nostalgic for my early days of independent wrestling fandom. And like I covered last week, I wasn't someone who took a deep dive into the history of New Japan or spent all my weekends tape trading to get a complete collection of Ring of Honor back catalogs. No, instead I was one that preferred the weird stuff. Instead of fixating on the war between Scum and Ring of Honor, I instead was worried about how Icarus would save Chikara from the grips of Deucalion and the Flood. Instead of watching AJ Styles and Shinsuke Nakamura battle it out over the IWGP Intercontinental Championship, I was watching Grado and Madman Manson do this. And most importantly, instead of spending tons of money every single month on exclusive WWE pay-per-views, I was spending only $5. Like I said last week, Colt Cabana was the first point on my holy trinity of professional independent wrestling, to a point where I'd follow him wherever he went. Whether that was the Art of Wrestling podcast, whether that was the Wrestling Road Diaries, and whether that was him and Marty Derosa providing commentary over some of the worst independent wrestling I have ever seen. And on paper, that's all $5 wrestling was supposed to be. Basically, Mystery Science Theater 3000, but for independent professional wrestling. Hell, it's what inspired us to start doing our own commentary videos for the channel. But the more I watched it, and the more $5 wrestling I took in, the more I realized it wasn't just MST3K for wrestling nerds. It was a love letter. A love letter to the actual independent wrestling scene back in the day. And it wasn't a love letter being penned by Colt Cabana or Marty Derosa. It was a love letter being penned by this man, Jake Manning. Fans of AEW Dark might recognize him as the Manscout, but for me, I've always seen him as the Vincent Kennedy McMahon of North Carolina. Just, you know, without all of the accusations. He was the lifeblood behind $5 wrestling. He was the heart of that company. And it all originated during his time working at High Spots. You see, Jake worked there as a documentarian, as a video editor, as an interviewer, as about 5 billion different things, honestly, from what I've looked up. And really, the origins of $5 wrestling came from one of Jake's first bigger hits for High Spots, in the form of the Heroes of Burke County, a short documentary that took a look at the hearts, lives, and souls of the individuals behind Burke County Wrestling, the company that would kind of become the prototype for what $5 wrestling would become. And through the Heroes of Burke County, Jake met the individual who would become one of the first breakout stars from $5 wrestling, the man known as Little Donnie.
When you step in the ring with me, you're gonna recognize who's your daddy.
You been working on that?
Yeah.
Throughout his time in $5 wrestling, Lil Donnie would prove to not just be a great underdog for the corporation, but corporation, that's not what $5 wrestling is. But Lil Donnie wouldn't just be a great underdog for the company. Instead, he would also prove to be kind of their hardcore icon. He was like the Sandman, just somehow better in the ring, weirdly enough. Throughout his tenure in the company, he would have multiple different death matches and have several hardcore bouts, and would even attract the attention of one of the bigger names in hardcore wrestling at the time in the form of Madman Pondo, who would team up with Donnie on numerous occasions. And to be honest with you, he needed it. Because if there was one feud that carried $5 wrestling throughout its entire tenure, it was Lil Donnie versus the Burke County Boys. You see, while Lil Donnie became the face of Burke County Wrestling and subsequently $5 Wrestling off the back of that DVD documentary release, things weren't always that way. In fact, for the longest time, Lil Donnie was getting outshone by the men known as the Burke County Boys, the team of Donnie's older brother, who of course is named Big Donnie, and Pork Chop Cash Jr., who I think is also his brother. I don't really know what their situation is. It's a real Dudley situation going on with them, so I'm not really sure what the deal is. It seems like they're all one big family, though. We'll come back to that later. They were kind of the faces of Burke County Wrestling, but unfortunately, when the documentary was being filmed, they were left out. They were out due to injuries, or I think one of them was in jail. I'm not really sure what that situation was about, but when $5 Wrestling starts up, the Burke County Boys return, and they immediately have their sights set on getting revenge on Lil Donnie. And the Burke County Boys, alongside Hardcore Terry Houston, would make Lil Donnie's life a living hell, and they would fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight, and I'll be honest, I don't know if there was ever a DVD release from $5 Wrestling that didn't have Lil Donnie facing a member of the Burke County Boys in some manner or fashion. Like, they feuded consistently throughout the history of the entire promotion, and let's not forget, there was like a 6-year hiatus, and when they came back from that, they were still fucking feuding for like 10 years. 10 calendar years they were battling, but after that hiatus was over, they somehow decided to make the feud kind of good, weirdly enough. You see, during one of their promos, they reveal the real reason they've been attacking Donnie for so long, and it's not jealousy, it's not hatred, it's not this vitriol they have in their throat for their little brother. No, it's concern. Pork Chop Cash Jr., God, what a fucking name. Pork Chop Cash Jr. and Big Donnie had been to the top of the wrestling mountain. Kind of. They had been in the industry longer. They had been hurt by professional wrestling, and they didn't want that same fate to await their little brother. They wanted to protect him. And in order to do that, they were willing to beat him within an inch of his life till he would finally quit, till he would finally give up, go home, and get a normal job to save him from this life that could cause someone so much pain. And in order to drive that point home, they just beat the shit out of him and let me repeat, 10 whole fucking years. They destroyed this boy. They decimated him, trying to get him to quit, but he never did. The heart of Little Donnie kept beating strong because he loved professional wrestling just that much, until finally the biggest twist comes when Pork Chop Cash Jr. turns on Big Donnie, finally asserting that Lil Donnie belongs in this industry and aligns himself alongside his little brother in forming the new Burke County Boys. I mean, it's not really clever, but you know, they're doing their best. All of that happened during what I considered to be kind of the $5 wrestling renaissance, during their reboot that started in the February of 2019. And in my opinion, the show got weirdly good at that point, which kind of seems counterproductive to the whole vibe of $5 wrestling. But the production value got better, the presentation was better, hell, commentary was no longer making extremely insensitive jokes about the wrestlers and different groups of people, and yeah, I'll just be honest. Colt, Marty, love you guys, but God, some of your commentary aged poorly. I'll just say this. Only watch the ones from 2019 forward. I cannot fully endorse all of the stuff from 2014. Yes, that's what made me fall in love with it, but just watch the trailers and only pay attention to the 2019 shows, really. Oof. Anyways, one of the biggest breakout stars from the $5 Renaissance was a guy who had been there from the beginning, and a guy who had taken one of the biggest wrestling tropes there was and turned it into an art form. You see, in just about every bad independent promotion around the entire United States, there was always one guy. basically the equivalent of a professional wrestling cover band. And in a world of Jimmy the Snake Roberts, Derek Flairs, and Dick Foleys, one name stood out above the rest, head and shoulders above everyone else, and it was none other than Jeff the Hitman Hart. The worst there is, the worst there was, and the worst there ever will be. He was a proud, definitely actually Canadian man whose promos were near unintelligible thanks to his extremely thick and real Canadian, not Southern, not at all North Carolinian, Southern accent.
Tonight I come here and end American Idiot career. I'm going to injure him or paralyze him. He will never, ever forget the name of Jeff the Hitman Hart. And they call me the Hitman for one reason. Oh, well, hit you so hard, you better call your damn mama.
He was the second most insane branch on the Hart family tree. He can't be first. Teddy Hart does still exist after all. But I will say this, much like how Jimmy the Snake Roberts carried a snake to the ring and replicated all of the actions of Jake the Snake perfectly, much like how Dick Foley was a carbon copy of Cactus Jack, Jeff the Hitman Hart was just like his namesake Bret Hart. I mean, he looks just like him. Well, I mean, he, at least in the ring, right? Like, he wrestled just like him. Well, I mean, at least he used the sharpshooter as his finisher. That's a stunner. Jesus. Well, anyways, during the $5 renaissance, Jeff Hart was quickly propelled into the main event scene. He said farewell to the Raider Rocks, Mike Levy's, and Storm Mavericks of the past, and he said hello to main event gold. God, that sounded a lot more impressive in my head. Anyways, he wasn't just taken to the main event for no apparent reason, however. No, he was sent there on a gasoline-powered fuel tank powered by none other than a bad boy. You see, up to this point, some of the bigger names they had in $5 wrestling were guys like Domino Cliff Compton, Madman Pondo, like I said earlier, and Eugene, and also, weirdly, Cedric Alexander. Like, I know they never really advertised him for the shows, but fucking Cedric Alexander was on $5 Wrestling. He was one of their referees, alongside Caleb Connolly from Impact. Shit's wild. Anyways, it's why it was kind of a really big deal when the man known as Joey Janela, a recent signee to All Elite Wrestling at the time, decided to grace the doors of $5 Wrestling, and he wanted a main event spot against the best they got. And they gave him Jeff Hart instead. And in the main event of the Carolina Stampede, Jeff Hart went toe-to-toe with Joey Janela in a match that I am frustrated at how good it is. Like, I get it, Joey Janela is a really good wrestler. Like, he got a quality match out of an invisible human being. He had a great match with Yoshihiko. Shouldn't surprise me that he did good against Jeff Hart, but even still, that match is way too good than it deserves to be. In fact, if there is any $5 wrestling show I'd recommend you go check out, it's the Carolina Stampede, strictly for that main event match of Jeff Hart versus the bad boy Joey Janela. And also for earlier in the show when a Power Ranger wrestles for some reason. I'm not really sure if they have the rights to that, but it's fine. But let's be honest here, if you have any memory of $5 wrestling, if you had any slight awareness of it back in the day, if you just came to this video hoping to really see what $5 wrestling was all about, there's really only one guy you want to talk about. There's only one person who really embodied the spirit of $5 wrestling. There's only one guy who could truly call himself the champion of $5 wrestling. And it's a man with the power of a freight train.
I don't know why you want to fight the freight train. You think you so bad and stuff. But I'm going to beat you up tonight, Raider Raw. Now, I'm going to keep this tight. It's going to stay right here on my smooth belly right here, Raider Raw.
There is so much to say about the man known as the Freight Train. There's too much for me to say. There's too much for me to say in this video. Hell, just check out the documentary. He has a whole documentary, and it is well earned, in my opinion. But Freight Train was one of the most dominant champions $5 Wrestling had. He was their first ever 2-time $5 Wrestling champion, and he was also the guy who got the most eyes on the promotion than anybody else, with guys like CM Punk, Cassius Ohno, and tons of other guys coming out in support of Freight Train, and subsequently $5 Wrestling itself. And anytime a new guy came into the promotion, whether that be Steve Corino, Cliff Compton, anybody, they made sure they got to work with Freight Train in some capacity. He was a veritable folk hero in the world of independent wrestling, getting cameo appearances on the Kevin Steen Show or Wake Up, It's Time to Die with Cliff Compton. He kind of became a legend, all thanks to $5 Wrestling. And the truth is, he deserved it. Yeah, no, he wasn't Shawn Michaels in the ring, he wasn't Ric Flair on the mic, and he wasn't The Rock in appearance, but he didn't need to be. All he needed to be was exactly who he was, and that was the Freight Train. This insatiably kind and loving human being who refused to quit, refused to ever give up, even when all logic says that he should have. He went 10 years on the independent professional wrestling scene with people refusing to book him. Hell, anytime he went to seminars, they would refuse to train him. People turned him down every single step of the way, and when anyone else would have quit, Freight Train continued to push. And it's through his tenacity and the refusing to ever give up, despite what any promoter told him, that Freight Train eventually finally came to $5 Wrestling, and it's what made him a veritable star. Like, hell, story time with Scotty Moe right now. I remember at WrestleMania 30, we were somehow staying in the exact same hotel as the High Spots guys. I don't even know how we pulled that off. But one day we were sitting in the lobby eating breakfast, getting ready to go to WrestleCon or something like that, and the doors to the elevator open, and out steps Colt Cabana. And of course, that's the man behind the art of wrestling. Hell, that's one of the biggest names out there at the time, and everyone freaked out and was like, hell yeah, Colt's here, awesome. And then Marty steps out, Marty Derosa, and everyone's like, oh, Marty, what's going on? Awesome, awesome. And, you know, everyone's kind of hanging out, schmoozing, schmozzing, or whatever. And then the elevator opens one more time, and Freight Train steps off. And I swear to God, it was like the fucking Beatles showed up. Everyone freaked out. They were like, yo, fuck Colt Cabana, fuck Marty Derosa, fuck you, we're going to meet Freight Train. It was amazing. And he had time for every single one of his fans. He stopped and he talked with all of us because that's just how genuinely nice of a human being he was. Hell, the entire $5 Wrestling team were sweethearts. I actually ended up having breakfast with Marty, weirdly enough. We had biscuits and gravy and probably talked about Jesse and Festus. I don't know. But yeah, whole crew are sweethearts, but Freight Train was the reason for all of them being sweethearts. He had this positivity that just radiated towards everyone around him. Despite all of the odds working against him, despite a decade of rejection from every single promoter that looked his way, Freight Train persisted, and he became a star because of it. In my opinion, in professional wrestling, you can agree on this or you can't, professional wrestling is like the fourth most important thing you have to do. The first most important thing is having a connection with your fans. And Freight Train had that in spades. He had that connection. He helped us believe. He made us stronger. He made us better people. And that was the power of the Freight Train. He was a guy who taught us that even when your back is against the wall, and even when 1 million people are screaming at you that you will never make it, and screaming that you should just stop and give up, there's always going to be at least one person that believes in you, and at least one person that says you can make it. And with that one person by your side, you can. Damn, I did not expect things to get that serious there at the end. But yeah, this is $5 wrestling. It's silly. Let's pull it back. But the truth of the matter is, it also wasn't the ill-willed and mean-spirited project everybody thought it was. It wasn't some exploitation project just trying to make a quick buck off of these guys' backs and embarrass them publicly. Instead, it was a love letter. It was a love letter to the weirdos. It was a love letter to the crazy ones that were willing to put their bodies on the line when only a few people were in the audience. It was a love letter to the psychopaths that looked at Bret the Hitman Hart and said, that could be me, even when all evidence is to the contrary. And it was a love letter to the ones who kept fighting no matter what. And it was a love letter that said those people, as crazy as it sounds, could be stars. And for a brief time, they were. So that was my little retrospective on the world of $5 wrestling. Make sure to go check it out if you've never seen them before. Like I said, a lot of the ones from 2019 forward were phenomenal and are a lot less problematic. Some of the ones back in the day, probably don't need to check out. Just watch like the trailers on YouTube. That'll be fine. Fun story about Freight Train before we go, by the way. I'm actually friends with Freight Train on Facebook, weirdly enough. The dude sends me a happy birthday message every single year, which is ridiculous because he has no idea who I am, but despite that, he's still such a sweetheart that he's like, I'm gonna tell everybody happy birthday because it's what they need. So yeah, I love Freight Train, but also, so my name, doxing myself here, my name is Scotty Moore. That is my full name. A name that, when spelled out, could also sound a bit like Scott D'Amore, the man behind Impact Wrestling. And I have gotten more than one message from Freight Train asking me if I could help him get into Impact somehow. And every time I'm like, no, buddy, I'm not that person, but God, I want you in Impact. I'm sorry. But yeah, Freight Train's a sweetheart. Make sure to go check out $5 Wrestling. Support them. I think Jake works at AEW's like merch team now, so buy merch from AEW if that helps out Jake, I guess. Yeah, so support independent wrestling, support all these wonderful people that help make these shows, and also support us. If you like $5 Wrestling's kind of mystery science theater vibe, go check out some of our commentary videos. We've got 2 out right now, one for WrestleMania 27 and one for the greatest show at Backlash, so go check those out, and we're gonna have a lot more in the future because that's kind of my favorite thing to do, is do commentary over crazy stuff in professional wrestling. So you know, Jake, if you can't afford Colt Cabana or Marty Derosa anymore, you can't always just hit me up. But as always, make sure to like, make sure to comment, and make sure to subscribe to get more Fight Boys in your feed. But be careful when you do, because when you're a Fight Boy, you're a Fight Boy for life.